We'd like to reward our Building While Flying listeners with a discount to Stork, an annual membership where we deliver content and resources on new topics directly to your inbox weekly. From social media marketing tactics to broader business best practices, we have 2+ years of content available. You will also get access to the Sasha Group through our private Facebook community. Usually $300 per year, we're offering a 20% discount for BWF listeners. Reach out to stork at thesashagroup.com to sign up.
Welcome to Building While Flying, a Sasha Group podcast where we interview business leaders about how they tackle challenges, stay resilient, and navigate ever-changing skies.
Hey everybody, this is Joe Quattrone, your host for today's episode of Building While Flying, and today I have a very unique and interesting guest, David Paykin. David, say hello to the Building While Flying audience.
Hello, everybody.
David has an interesting journey. He started off his career in insurance sales until one fateful day, about a year ago, I believe, where David got fired. And he posted some content to social media talking about him getting fired and that he thought that it might be the best thing for him. David, walk us through that day and let us know why you had an inclination that this might have been the best thing for you.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is understanding that that I just needed to do something a little bit different, and that in essence, the getting fired was going to be a really cool way for me to essentially just guarantee that I could go and dive into what I actually wanted to do. And at the time, it was really just working on ideas that I had and that I was doing on the side while I had been working full time, but now I could dedicate my entire the entire length of time that I had to really going into it. And when I started out, I actually did a couple of different things that didn't pan out, which was initially I started streaming on Twitch. And I was doing a little bit of two things, which was one, I had played chess for about like 15 years beforehand, a lot of those years competitively when I was younger, and then, play a little bit more recreationally. And then that was really blowing up as a space. And so I thought, okay, it'd be cool to see like, how can I play out here? And so I've got some old streams of that where I was basically streaming for, 6 to 8 hours a day live. And it gave me a lot of the understanding of like how to keep something entertaining for a long period of time. And then a couple of those sessions, I was doing some kind of young professional, trying to help people with careers, sharing my perspective. And I think that's really important, that term, which is sharing your perspective. I think that when you're somebody who hasn't worked a long career, the idea that you're coming in as an expert or somebody who really, understands every single nook and cranny, it's just simply unrealistic. It's not true. And so what I did is I just shared my perspective on what was working for me. And realizing that Twitch basically had no organic reach, and that many of the people who had built a community on there had built it because were bringing it over from YouTube or brought it over from their competitive gaming days. I realized that I couldn't be on that platform long term to try and build a community. And that's where I started posting on TikTok, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. And you've grown quite a bit in just a short amount of time. I think, 1.7 million followers on TikTok?
Yeah, probably less than that because I've been diversifying on other platforms. And when you don't post as much on one platform, especially when you already have a community on there, you start to like lose community members. And so I can get into why I realized that I needed to pivot and really diversify where my community was. But yeah, it's somewhere around over 1.5 million or something like that.
Wow, it's amazing. And so when you decided after you lost your job and after Twitch wasn't necessarily working out from a organic reach perspective, you made a decision to get into TikTok and start publishing content and really offering up advice to people about how to go and fetch jobs and get interviews and really get their stuff in order. Talk to us a little bit about what was going on kind of macro in the space. I recall about a year ago that would put us square in the middle of the pandemic, maybe slightly coming towards recovery. Mm-hmm. I think a vaccine was in place. I imagine there were some like interesting wrinkles to the market back then because the job market wasn't as favorable to employees as it is today, where almost all the leverage is in the hands of the employees right now. But what was going on in your mind when you're doing all this during the middle of the pandemic? Were you worried at all that hey, maybe maybe I'm not gonna find another full time job. Maybe I need to pursue other interests because there's this or amazing thing called the internet out there, and I can kind of write my own history. What was going through your head when all that stuff was going down and we were in the weirdest market we've ever been in?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different. You have a couple different questions in there, and if they're, I could go down a rabbit hole on a couple of them, but I'll just cover a high level stuff, which is I think that at the time, what I was seeing on social media. The reason why I felt the need to do this is one, I had actually been putting out content around young professionals 5 years earlier. I had
Right.
like started this podcast, and like I could only do so much. But what I realized when I was interviewing people was that one, there was they weren't necessarily able to share everything that was going on because
Right.
what if my boss sees this? What if my
Right.
manager sees this? What if my company does something about it? And so when I was interviewing people, I was like, that was not what we were talking about 10 minutes ago, right? But as soon as the cameras come on, of course, it's going to be a different perspective because, and understandably so, you're worried that if you say the wrong thing, it could really hurt you in your
Sure.
career. And so what I realized was that in doing that, it wasn't going to happen off of me interviewing other people. I needed to share mine and take a massive risk on my own career and share that. And so one of the big things I did early on that I didn't see a lot of people doing in just social media in general in the career space was they weren't actually sharing things for free. And what happens is that all of the people who have a reluctance or have skepticism about whether or not you're actually there to help them, it's much easier for you to show that you're actually going to help them by sharing the resource for free. So like all the stuff that I have as free resources are literally Google Docs. You don't have to sign up for them. I don't take people's emails, and of course that comes at my own detriment because now I don't have like a private email list. I don't have a phone number list where I can go and reach out to them. But I felt like it was the right thing to do, and I felt like it was actually in the interest of somebody who's coming in and they need help with their career, and
Hmm.
somebody who couldn't necessarily afford an $800 course or a
Hmm.
$2,000 an hour coaching session or all these master classes. And so that was where I really started was like, how can I reverse engineer making sure that this is the best possible thing for each individual person who even comes across my content? A lot of the things that I did early on that a lot of other people weren't doing was one, I was following back every single person who followed me for the first 1,000 community members. So if you go and look at my TikTok, you'll see that there's about like 1,300 people I'm following. The first 1,000 of that are actually all the people who decided to join the community and took a chance on me. Well,
Right.
I followed them back and I would jump into DMs and literally help them step by step with whatever they were working on.
Right.
And then I would go and then the other thing is I also went live every single day once I hit 1,000 followers
Mm.
because then I was able to go and help people at scale in these individual, more intimate settings, really helping them from a Q&A perspective.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and going live every day. The reason I was able to do that, where a lot of other people burnt out trying to even match it, was because of that experience I had with Twitch, where a lot of people would look at that as a failure, but for me, it was getting the reps in so that I could go and do this
Right.
every single day.
And I mean, I would imagine when you're going live every single day and you keep a record of those lives, that you have other content to pull from if you chop it into micro content and reuse it across platforms. Has going live been an interesting
You know what's the
production tool for
craziest
you?
part? I never chopped up a single piece of content. I literally just posted them raw footage onto on IGTV because I just wanted the documentation that it happened because I knew
Got it.
nobody would believe me. If it didn't exist, I knew that people wouldn't believe me unless they were the early community members. So I literally have the lives of back in December 2020 when, I think we were at like 10,000 or 12,000 community members. And because I assumed that nobody would actually believe that like how as things have played out now where I've grown a community and we're really helping so many people that they would believe that I was doing that early on, and the same things I'm doing today is what I was doing back then when there
Mm.
was just a couple of people in those live sessions versus hundreds.
Well, it seems like you've got a lot of inspiration. I'm not sure how much you follow Gary Vee's content, but knowing you a little bit and having a couple conversations personally, it sounds like you've got at least the ethos that Gary has when it comes to providing a lot of value up front before you ask for anything in return. Has that been a seminal part of kind of how you've been building audience? Really, that idea of don't even worry about monetize, like figure it out later, kind of thing.
Yeah, so and I don't again I don't know how much of your audience, and I assume that most people have no idea who I am. That's just the assumption I make when I go into any situation. But the I've actually never monetized my community. So
Yeah.
I've never sold a course, I've never done coaching, I've never done an ebook, masterclass, merchandise, because I fundamentally believe that I believe that this stuff is going to play out, and that having a reputation of having never monetized your community, if I'm able to pull it off, of never monetizing individual community members, is going to be something that's a huge competitive advantage, and something that where people can actually see that the actions have mapped to what I've been doing since the start.
Right.
It's that's of course been very stressful and very difficult, right? Because it's very hard to not monetize. You have to live very frugally and basically, not spend a single dollar that you don't need to. But I think that that's definitely one of the places that Gary and I match a mentality in our mindset about this, which is that people can see through the actions. Like, you can tell them all day that you only care about community, but when they see you continuing to, as he puts it, right hook, and continue to either, whether it's an NFT project that you don't believe in, whether it's taking a sponsorship, like one sponsorship after another that you again have never posted about in the past, so clearly you weren't like a huge fan of it before. That type of stuff plays out, and I think that I think that for what we're doing right now, at least what I'm doing on my end, I think that there's going to be a very cool opportunity of like showing that you can kind of run the 4 minute mile of never monetizing individual community members if you can figure out how to build a business off of your execution on social media.
Right. So
And I can get
essentially,
more into like
you're playing the extreme long game, and
as long as it gets, as
you want to
long as
build
you
the
possibly
David
imagine. Yeah.
Paykin reputation out to the extreme. And then I'm sure you have other career pursuits that you want to try to go after if and when you get to the point you want to be from a personal branding or a reputation perspective. What are some of those pursuits? Do you want to write books? What do you want to do with your life after you become this career placement mogul?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about any of that. I'm honestly, at the end of the day, I'm just one guy sharing his perspective. And frankly, like, even when I was starting out to even now, I've gotten pushback, a significant amount from this industry. Career coaches don't like that I'm basically giving out their stuff except better for free.
Mhm.
HR doesn't like that they now have a ton more candidates that they have to go through. And I can also get into like why I'm doing this like crazy, unkept hair and unkept beard. There's a strategy behind that in showing the authenticity with my community, that you can actually go and help people by sharing your perspective without
Mhm.
necessarily having to dress up in a suit or a nice, button down and tie, that you see a lot of people in the career space do. And I think that long term, my plan is to try and do this across every niche and every industry.
Mhm.
So, a big thing that, I grew up with was like education was the way out,
Mhm.
because my parents are immigrants and I'm, the, kind of the first generation that grew up in the US, but I go and see all the stuff that they had to go through. And for me, it gives me a lot of like gratitude in knowing that, what they had to go through in the former Soviet Union, what they went through as specifically, their background in the Soviet Union. And so for me, the ability to make education that is actually helpful to people completely free and be able to do that across all the different segments of education, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's understanding venture capital, whether it's careers, whether it's going and understanding navigating corporate life, whatever that might be. It's basically the idea is doing this across all other niches and industries that I can.
Yeah, it sounds like also to some extent you've got a lot of challenger brand in you. You've got a lot of this. I wouldn't say want to say fight the system mentality, but I've seen a lot of your posts. Actually, you're one of my favorite follows on TikTok, and it reminds me a lot of like my perspective as like a parent. Right, I'm a parent of 3 kids. And for the most part, for the past 20 years, I've lived in major cities like New York and Los Angeles in an era with the internet, and I tell people frequently, like, I love my mom and dad, I love my mother-in-law, I love these people. They didn't raise kids in the same environment that I'm raising kids currently. So I have to kind of take their opinions and perspectives with a grain of salt. Right? They didn't have the internet back when I was growing up. Like we didn't know as much about how crazy society was outside of your little bubble that you existed within. So I imagine career advice is very similar when you talk to people. Like, and a good one was I kind of went back through some of your old content today, and I remember seeing one post that could have stood to be slightly controversial. And I'd love to hear how the community management of this post went, but it was the idea of you
Sure.
bringing up the fact that a 2 week notice is completely irrelevant, or not completely irrelevant, but needs to be addressed at a more, you know, in a more open playing field, because maybe that advice is a little bit tired and cliched and doesn't apply to everybody in 2022. You don't have to necessarily go into that piece in particular, but how has it been with some of your hot takes or some of your opinions that go against the grain of what society tells you that you need to be doing from a career perspective?
Yeah, I think that again, you brought up earlier Gary's mentality and being in the weeds, and like it's tough to cover like everything that I've done, but essentially like on Instagram, I answer every single DM. So I've gotten thousands of DMs at this point. I answer all of them. I've also got a private LinkedIn community, and from there, people are sharing the different experiences that they're having. And what I've started to realize, and just looking at the 2 weeks notice thing, is one, the expectation from employers comes from a little bit more of an old school mentality that isn't necessarily wrong. I'm not saying that you shouldn't put in a 2 weeks if you feel like that's right, but not every situation requires you to do that. And I think that oftentimes it almost can be a disadvantage because if you put in your 2 weeks before you're ready, and a lot of people might do that, then you can create a not a strategically ideal situation as somebody who's trying to find a different opportunity.
Right.
But I think that one of the biggest things is that I'm actually in the weeds and talking to a lot of the people who are going through it versus I think that a majority of the people in the career tips and job search space usually are holding on to 1 to 3 kind of like pillar beliefs, right? And they're not going and challenging their own beliefs by going and talking to the people who are going through it. If we were talking to somebody who is launching a product or service, and they were saying, well, we're just only going to go and listen to all the people who design these systems or who are only on one side of the situation, aka if you're only talking to people in HR and only talking to people who are hiring managers, you're missing a whole piece of it, which are the people who are actually going through the job search process. And something that I think that I've really narrowed in on is going in and actually focusing on the people who are going through it. And that has given me way more insight than listening to somebody who's been in HR for 15 plus years and thinks that they know everything that's going on when literally 2 years ago, the job search market is different from what it was the year after it and is completely different from the last 6 months, where
Right.
there's been a lot more of an employee market. And
Right.
so I think that one, people are holding on to kind of old world beliefs or like kind of resting on the laurels instead of continuing to challenge their own assumptions and also going in and actually doing the work. That's the number one thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of people is like they're just not going and doing the work. They're not going to go and talk to a dozen plus people every single day to go and understand what is actually going on the ground level. And if
Right.
you're not doing that, then of course it's not going to seem and most people aren't going to do that. And so if most people aren't going to do that, of course the tips that I give are going to go against the grain because you're one of the few people who's going and putting in the work and you have the actual first party data because you're talking directly to the actual sources versus going and reading a headline, which I know a lot of people do. Like they'll go and look at a survey that's like 100 people, and that is, I forget what the word is, but basically like those 100 people now represent 100 million, and that makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
Like it's just the numbers aren't there to justify that assumption.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you've got the data to back it up, right? You're building groups and communities that give you the data firsthand. So while somebody can cite a survey that was kind of rolled up into an article that they had nothing to do with, you've got thousands and thousands of person audience that you can go talk to on a daily basis and really feel like you've got your finger on the pulse. So that's pretty cool. That brings
Right.
me to a thought that, or just a curiosity that I have. It seems like universities might be interested in having you come to their campuses. Have you ever been reached out to by certain college campuses or maybe student unions or student groups to have you come speak at their campus?
Yeah, I've been reached out to. I think that one of the biggest things is that if I were to, it's kind of a trade off, right? Like if I go and do that, well, one, I don't know if necessarily they're gonna like that I'm gonna say some of the things I'm gonna say because I have some thoughts of like as somebody who went to college and did my master's, I have some thoughts about the actual ROI of a college degree right
Me
now.
too.
And I don't know if that's necessarily what they want to hear. And then secondly, I think that if I have the choice between going and building out what I'm doing right now versus going and talking to 20 people, well, I can help those 20 people plus
You
a
don't even have to
multiple of
leave
20
your
more
apartment.
of
Yeah, you
those
can just do it on
people
DM.
online. Yeah. so it's like and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, am I going to limit this to the 20 people who just happen to be in a privileged position to be able to pay for it or be at a school where they could bring me in, or do I want to make this accessible to everybody?
Right.
That's one of the biggest things for me is like in this quest for me to try and make sure that all this education and resources are available to everybody. Like I'm sitting here trying to make sure that literally everybody, regardless of your race, regardless of your background, regardless of where you come from, that you have access to it. And thankfully, we live in a society where a lot of people have phones, even people who are in some of the toughest situations. And so I can reach them and I can really try to provide them the tools that are going to help them to break out of that situation. So that's why I'm always going to lean towards putting out content versus going and helping 20 people in this, in this little workshop session at a college.
One last thing I have for you in terms of advice for our audience. So our audience, as you may or may not be able to expect, coming from the Sasha Group, is full of business owners, first generation business owners, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, things of that nature. So it's not necessarily a comp for people that are trying to go out and find a job, but in your experience as somebody that's kind of branched out and no longer is kind of thinking about like a W-2 lifestyle and working for another company, you probably share a lot of DNA with people that are watching or listening to this episode right now. What's some advice that you have for an emerging entrepreneur or solopreneur on trying to, you know, obviously there's a tough things going on outside of these walls. We've got inflation, we've got weird job markets, we've got a lot of different things going on. What's your advice to those people that may be struggling right now? Because I'm sure you've gone through your own struggles. How would you encourage them to keep going?
I think that the biggest thing is making sure that one, what you're actually doing is something that you believe in. And I know that that's cliche, but there's a lot of people who are doing the next trendy thing. When I was doing the career tips and stuff like that, it was far from trendy. I actually didn't know anybody who was doing it personally. It was just something that I fundamentally believe needed to exist. And if you don't feel that way about whatever you're working on, whether it's a business or it's putting out content around what you believe in, it's not going to work out because, for example, I mean, like I'm legitimately, even now, right? Especially now, because now I'm on other platforms, but, I'm putting in 12 to 16-hour days every day, like 7 days a week for the last 2 years. And I don't think that I could possibly do that without burning out if I didn't fundamentally believe in what my vision is and what I'm doing to try and help people. And I think that no matter what you end up doing with your business, if you don't love it, you're not going to be able to get past those really tough points. And then two, the biggest unlock for any small business owner right now is going hard at content, specifically TikTok and LinkedIn. And I know that, probably your audience hears that a lot, but there is no amount of performance marketing you will ever do in your life that will ever compete with organic content around the thing that you're trying to promote or
Yeah.
the thing you're trying to sell.
And they do hear that a lot. That's just the challenge is it's really difficult, right? So like actually, like you said, spending 12 to 16 hours a day, like that's the reality if you want to make this work. And if you've got time, if you can figure out how to
Mm-hmm.
do it, that's the effort you got to put in. It's not going to come easy. Nobody's going to give it to you. So anyway, thank you so much for being with us. How can people reach you? I mean, obviously I know how to reach you, but what are some social media handles you want to throw out there so our audience can get familiar with you?
Yeah, it's literally at David Paykin, David, and then Paykin, so Paykin, so at David Paykin on all platforms. So thankfully it's fairly consistent, and it's been a real honor.
All right, folks, you're going to want to go out and give this guy a follow. He's, like I said before, he's one of my favorite followers on TikTok, but I'm going to have to branch out and follow him on other platforms. I'm also really eager to join that LinkedIn group. Anyway, thank you so much, David, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.